Hi there. I want to talk about something that is a mature topic. However, I think it's important that young people know about this topic too. So, if you are a young person, which is to say, if you are under the age of majority in your wherever you are, country or state or province, please have your parents watch this first. Make sure they're okay with it, and then you watch it, with or without them. Right. Now that you've had time to do that, I want to talk about prostitution and why you should not be engaging in sex with prostitutes. I mean, even if you don't engage in sex with prostitutes, there is a great deal of risk. And some of the risks are very similar to sex with prostitutes. Although, why? Why now? Why couldn't you bother me before? 1 minute ago. So what I mean here is that having sex with a prostitute or gigolo versus having sex with somebody who's not doing it for the money has similar risks to it and similar consequences. However, when it comes to prostitution, many of those risks are amplified vastly because of the large number of customers they serve each day. Now, I'm going to use the word prostitute, and I'm including gigolos or male prostitutes in that category. So when I say prostitute, you think of whatever you're interested in. I mean, as far as gender is concerned. So what can happen if you have sex with an everyday person who's not doing it for the money? Well, obviously, one of you, if you're opposite genders, I mean, one of you has the capability of becoming pregnant, that might happen, especially if you don't use a condom and maybe other protection. And that's something that's shared whether you're a prostitute or not, unless you've had like a vasectomy for men or a tubal ligation for women so the eggs can't get to the uterus. Another risk, and it's far more severe, and it took the life of my wife, most likely, is what we used to call in the old days venereal diseases, and now we call them sexually transmitted diseases. Yeah, I can speak really well. So, sexually transmitted diseases, as you might guess, you engage in some kind of a sexual activity. It doesn't have to be sex. It can be any kind of sexual activity. And you might get something. And you might not expect that you're going to get it where you're going to get it. But, you know, the funny thing is it takes skin damage in many instances, not all, but in many instances involving especially fungus and viruses for that invader to successfully get into your system. So, say you have a fungus in your mouth and you're sucking on somebody's, earlobe, we'll say. And you are sucking and nibbling and doing it so roughly that you actually cause the transfer of fungus into the skin of that person. Now, depending on what kind of fungus it is, it may take root and start growing there. It may not. But it's a possibility. Same with viruses. If, say, you had a cold sore and you were nibbling on that, and the cold sore was active, which is called HSV or herpes simplex virus. If you were to damage the skin and that cold sore was active and leaking liquid, the chances would be pretty high that there would be an infection of the virus in that earlobe that would, be kind of gross, but could be something that lasts forever. Now, when we talk about germs and we talk about parasites like worms and stuff like that, and lice, or what we colloquially call crabs, that is kind of a different category, but some of them can be introduced through friction, through abrasions, through scratches. So, yeah, you could have sex with somebody or engage in some sexual activity, and you could end up, whether they're prostitute or not, with a sexually transmitted disease. Now, the difference between having sex with an average person and having sex with, say, a nymphomaniac, and I don't know the male name for that, I forgot, and a prostitute, is the degree of risk is much higher for those two categories, and the variety of STDs you might get. Now, in that case, when I say STD, I'm including the funguses and the viruses, the bacteria, and certain types of parasites. Your risk is much, much higher with either of those people. Now, I am not casting judgment on them. I am certainly not suggesting that we need to punish these people. Oftentimes, people are in prostitution for one of two reasons. Either they have been trafficked, which means they've been turned into a slave somehow or other in the sex trade, which can be done through a pimp who pretends to love them and then convinces them to have sex so that they can take the money. Or they are desperate for money, and it's the only thing that they can think of that will get them money. Now, there are nymphomaniacs, for example, who become prostitutes. There are pole dancers and other exotic dancers that become prostitutes as a kind of a side hustle. But anytime you're engaging in sex with a large number of people every day, especially if you're not using condoms, because while the pill can prevent pregnancy, and the IUD and the injections and the implant in the arm and the diaphragm and all that stuff, while all of those things can prevent pregnancy, or usually, unless they're not put in there correctly or something else happens, but while they can prevent pregnancy, virtually none of them, aside from the condom, has the ability to prevent the transmission of some diseases. Now, if you have crabs or pubic lice, which are little parasites that live in your pubic hair, and they're not too hard to get rid of. I mean, because they don't want to be on the rest of your body because the temperature is wrong. They don't want to be on your head because the temperature is wrong. So if you have body lice or head lice, they are all specific to certain regions of the body, as are the pubic lice. And you can get rid of the pubic lice very easily by just shaving off all the hair. They've got nothing to hold on to. That's their home. That's how they stay there, and they lay the eggs on the hairs. So you remove the hair, and you make sure you don't wear clothes that were used while you had the lice, and you clean out all of your clothes, and you should be good to go. But things like funguses, well, the funguses don't just sit in just those two spots, the vagina hole and the shaft of the penis, or the head of the penis. They also exist in the areas around that. They could exist on the scrotum. They could exist on the anus. They could exist in the I forgot the name, the area between the genitals and the anus. They can exist. Fungus can be on your fingernails, and in many other places it's possible to have fungus. So even the condom doesn't protect against everything, but it is the single most effective way to stop the transmission of many STDs. And let me just clarify something here. If you're engaging in oral sex with somebody, paid or unpaid, you can still get those viruses and bacteria and parasites and funguses. Yeah, it's still going to happen. Now, earlier I mentioned that it's possible that the reason my wife died was because I engaged in unprotected sex. When I was younger, it was not known that human papillomavirus, which causes skin tags and warts and can lead to cervical dysplasia, which leads to cervical cancer, could actually cause cancer. It was only known that they caused skin tags and warts. And back sometime in the late 90s, I believe it was, they finally figured it out, but I didn't hear about it. I mean, it's not like something that's important enough or spectacular enough for people to want to put it on the news. They're always looking for things that are really going to grab people's attention. You know, it's like, oh, by the way, 2/3 of people have human papillomavirus, so you should probably engage in safe sex. Yeah, no. So what makes it worse is that, number one, a lot of women worldwide every year die because of untreated cervical cancer, because they had unprotected sex, and that allowed through the abrasions for the virus to get into the cervix area that's outside the uterus and to start making warts, which altered the DNA, which led to cancer. My wife died because of that. And it's possible that I have human papillomavirus somewhere. I don't know where, because I have no warts. The last time I saw warts on my hands was like decades and decades ago, long before I knew my wife. And I have no warts on my genitals. I have no warts on my tongue or any wart in my lips. I mean, I have human HSV on my lips. It's dormant most of the time, and it stays dormant most of the time. But I don't know. I mean, I know there was at least one woman whom I was engaged to who was secretly cheating on me and who actually had human papillomavirus on her cervix. It had gotten to the stage of cervical dysplasia, and then she had that removed with cryotherapy. And that was right in the mid-90s. And so I didn't know. She didn't know. And I didn't find out until my wife was diagnosed that human papillomavirus carries, or causes, I should say, indirectly causes cancer. So that's that story. But when you sleep with a nymphomaniac or you sleep with a prostitute, you know, maybe you meet a person on the street and they have one partner a day, or one partner a week, or one partner a month, or maybe two partners a day. Who knows? But when you meet a prostitute or a nymphomaniac, they have had multiple partners every single day for years. And oftentimes, when it comes to a nymphomaniac, they may or may not choose to use protection. But sometimes with prostitutes, their customers don't want to use protection. So that means that indirectly you are risking catching all of the diseases that person, all those customers every day passed on to that prostitute or that nymphomaniac. I mean, obviously, no, not customers, but lovers. So the risk level is higher, not just for you getting an STD from unprotected sex, but also that you're going to get multiple STDs from unprotected sex. So just imagine you're always itchy around the crotch. Could be fungus that you got from somebody else. You get up in the morning, your pee hurts. you see some white stuff or yellow stuff come out, which looks like pus, but it only lasts a short time. You could have syphilis, you could have gonorrhea, you could have chlamydia. And these days, with the rise of the antibiotic-resistant bacteria, we are eventually going to get to the point where all of you who are having unprotected sex are not going to be able to be cured of it. And so you will be debilitated by it over time. Syphilis, for example, can cause insanity. It can cause lesions of the bone. It can cause all kinds of terrible problems that can actually kill you over time. So once antibiotics are no longer effective on syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and all these other problems, having unprotected sex is going to be like before we had antibiotics. You're going to be seriously endangering yourself. And you think, well, okay, I'll just have oral sex then, or I'll have anal sex. Well, it's still a hole. Okay? It's still a nice, moist place. Whether it's the urethra of the male or the female, or it's the vagina, or it's the mouth, or it's the anal area. Still very vulnerable. So that virus that killed my wife, you can get it in your mouth, in your throat, and it can cause cancer there. You can get it in your anus, and it can cause cancer there. So it's not just a risk for women, it's a risk for everybody. So when you watch, say, Pornhub, which is a bad place to go because, number one, there is some very destructive porn on there that is very bad for mental health. There is also on many of the websites that link with Pornhub actually are actively transmitting malware through their pictures and their videos and their websites. So when you go to Pornhub or one of these other places, you are risking getting malware on your computer. And it's very easy for it to happen. So another thing that's bad about Pornhub, though, is very rarely will you see people on Pornhub having protected sex. The use of condoms is extremely rare. Now, that means that sex workers in the porn industry, which are protected by law, are putting themselves at high risk. And they'll say, but they test us every day for STDs or every week or whatever. It doesn't matter. All it takes is one person to introduce a disease, and it goes all around to everybody who's having sex in the porn industry. I mean, HIV has hit the porn industry. HPV, HSV, gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, and CMV, cytomegalovirus. By the way, despite what websites claim, it is virtually impossible for your body to get rid of a virus that once it gets in. A lot of viruses are very difficult, like humans, herpes simplex is very difficult to get out of your body. Very, very difficult. You would have to know exactly where it was residing in your body, and then they'd have to go deep enough to get it at its secret home, and that could be quite deep. So you'd have a scar. With HPV, same thing. HPV and HSV both hide in the deep layers of your skin. Now, as for CMV or cytomegalovirus, that is another forever virus. And HIV runs through your whole system. So it's you are putting yourself, and if you are in a relationship with somebody and you're cheating on them, you're in an open relationship where you are swinging, or you're open to having other partners even though you're committed to somebody, you are increasing the risks. And when you go to a nymphomaniac, or even worse, you go to a prostitute, you are basically guaranteeing bad things are going to happen to you and to your loved one and to anybody else that you get into bed with, or in the closet, or in the bar, or whatever, hotel, boat, swimming pool, I don't know. Now, this is very important for you to understand, because some of these STDs, if left untreated, can cause organ failure, can cause blindness, and please, no jokes about masturbation and blindness. Not true. I'm living proof. And can cause insanity, can cause damage to the bones, and it can even cause death. Yeah. So there's the STDs, there's the pregnancy. Now let's look at it from the other perspectives. When you go looking for some rando on some hookup site, and you go to bed with them, or you go to meet them, they come to your place, you go to their place, or even to a hotel or a car, it doesn't even matter. There is a risk, especially for prostitutes, that the person they're going to meet is going to hurt them, or torture them and kill them, or just kill them. Because there are serial killers and psychopaths who deliberately target people who are at risk. Prostitutes are extremely at risk. And oftentimes, if you delve into the histories of psychopaths and serial killers, they go after prostitutes. For example, Jack the Ripper, very famous case. It's been solved, most likely. I saw a video a couple of months ago about who the person was. So being a prostitute is extremely dangerous. I mean, at the very least, you're risking pregnancy and STDs. But if you're not working within a system where you are protected actively, where they're like, there's a camera in the room, so that if the person that you're with gets dangerous, the big bruisers will come in and deal with that person very harshly. Well, especially if you're a streetwalker, or you're going to people's hotels or houses, it's high risk. Very, very high risk. So, and if you happen to be hooking in an area where there's a lot of drug use, a lot of crime, the chances of you being killed by somebody are even higher. Now, granted, nymphomaniacs don't necessarily go to those places, you would think, but they're going to go wherever they're going to go to look for sex, because they have an uncontrollable urge to have as much sex as they can every day. Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, they deserve to die. No, I told you at the beginning why they're doing it. Either they've been enslaved, or they are so financially desperate that they have no choice. Do slaves deserve that treatment? I mean, imagine somebody in your family whom you love suddenly disappears, and 10 years later you see them on a police raid. They have been arrested for being a prostitute. And you find them and you discover that they disappeared because they were kidnapped and drugged and forced to become a prostitute. How would you feel about that? Would you want that loved one of yours to be punished for something that was totally beyond their control? Because it happens. And often it's children that are the victims. They get trafficked into the sex trade as kids, as teenagers. So no, these people do not deserve to be killed. However, you also have to remember that every so often, one of these people who works in the sex trade as a prostitute gets fed up and starts killing people. There was a case of that was back in I think the 70s and 80s. This woman who was a prostitute did kill a few of her customers. Now, she had some explanations for it, and she had a very messed up life before prostitution and as a prostitute, including being attacked by people and being abused and stuff like that, drug use. But even if you're not going to a prostitute, just trying to hook up with somebody could be the last time you ever have freedom, because you could be the next victim of sex trafficking, or it could be the beginning of a series of torture events followed eventually by death. I'm not trying to scare people, but the reality is that there are an ample number of stories out there. I mean, a huge quantity of stories about this sort of stuff. It is easy to see. And a lot of young people, I don't know if they realize just how much danger they're putting themselves in, short-term and long-term. I mean, I was introduced to sex when I was 10. I mean, not sex, but sexual activity by somebody, another child who had been sexually molested. And another child who had been sexually molested and was sexually molesting his sister. And his father was sexually molesting his sister. And it's just, at that age, you don't know. And if your parents don't approach it the right way to help you, then you end up having problems. And I remember one time the boy who was having sex with his sister and his father was having sex with his sister, he told me that another friend of his with whom he was active had given him a disease. I think it was herpes simplex. And he didn't really, he told me what it was. He didn't really seem to fully grasp what it meant, though. And I certainly didn't. I was only a little bit older than him. So a lot of people are not aware when they start becoming sexually active, especially if they have been abused sexually by somebody at a young age. And then they may be subjected to diseases and physical abuse as well. And one of the strangest, maybe not strangest, but one of the stranger stories I've heard is there was a man named Mark Andrew Twitchell, who was born in 1979. He was a Canadian filmmaker, and he was the he was involved in the TV show Dexter, which was about a serial killer. And in order to create accurate scenes, supposedly, involving serial killer activity, he actually did that to people. He would lure people to his house pretending to be a woman, and he would tell them, well, don't come to my front door, it's broken, come through the alley, and you'll have to go through the garage. I'll leave the door open so that you can get in, and then you can come inside and we can have some fun. And people were thinking, well, I'm going to be meeting this gorgeous woman, because he would pose as a woman or whatever. Some of the people, a couple of people escaped, actually. One person escaped, didn't report it. A second person escaped. The police, apparently, if I remember correctly, did not either deal with it or could not figure out where he had been. But there was at least one person who was murdered. His name was John Brian Altinger. So basically what would happen is these people would see that the garage door was partially open, that enough that they could, duck down and get in or crawl in, usually crawl in, I believe. And they would get in there and they would find Mark in there, and he would try to, lure them in further and get their confidence, but he had plastic up all over the place to catch the blood splatters, and he would attack and kill these people. I'm not saying that you should spend your life being afraid that you're going to end your life trying to have a sexual encounter with somebody. But I am saying that whether that it's never happened to me. I mean, I'm no longer sexually active. Once my wife died, I said, well, I'm not going to risk giving somebody else HPV. So I'm permanently off the market. But, if you've never watched somebody die of cancer, go from this robust person who's in the bloom of health and youth and turn into this shriveled shell, it's hard for you to understand just how horrible that is. And yes, in this country, the medical system is fairly good, not the best in the world, but it's fairly good. And hey, a lot of people now survive cancer. But in a lot of other countries, the medical system isn't good. And that was one of the reasons that my wife died. I mean, it was a complicated story, but the fact that my wife could not get high quality care was a major factor in her death. We were living in her country, Indonesia. And this is not me trying to shame Indonesia. I mean, Indonesia is a developing country, and their medical services are, trying to catch up. And they have the problem that the cultures that exist there often interfere with the proper administration of medical services. So please, if you are a prostitute, find a way out. If you are considering going to a prostitute, or you know somebody who's an nympho and you're just horny, just don't. You're only signing yourself up for bad things to happen. Yeah, sure. Yeah, you can orgasm, but it's not smart to engage in unprotected sex with anyone. I hope you take this seriously so that you don't lose a loved one like I did, and you don't have to suffer the way my wife did. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good day.